I've been urban exploring for years, diving headfirst into the forgotten and the forbidden. From abandoned houses and factories to ghost towns and caves, my flashlight has lit up countless stories left behind by time. But caves were different. They weren't just about people or the echoes of lives lived. They were about the raw, untouched mystery. Every dark tunnel, every twist and turn was a question waiting to be answered. So when Eric, a close friend and fellow adventurer, told me about a hidden cave he stumbled across near Mammoth Cave National Park, I was immediately in. He said it was buried deep off trail, barely noticeable, and likely undiscovered. He hadn't dared to explore it alone, and wanted me to tag along. I didn't hesitate to agree. We planned, checked our gear, and set a date. The hike to the cave was grueling, an hour of pushing through dense overgrowth, navigating uneven terrain, and avoiding hidden roots and brambles. Finally, Eric stopped abruptly, motioning ahead. There it was. The entrance was small, barely 6 feet wide, a dark oval set into the hillside. Hidden by foliage and the natural slope of the land, it was almost invisible. I marveled that Eric had even found it. After a quick double check of our equipment, we stepped inside. At first, the cave was unimpressive, just a small chamber with uneven walls and the loose rocks scattered across the floor. The air was cold and stale, carrying the familiar dampness of underground spaces. We explored it for a bit, but it seemed like a dead end. Disappointment was starting to set in when I spotted it, a narrow tunnel at the back of the chamber, half obscured by a jutting rock. It was tight, claustrophobia-inducing tight. We'd have to crawl, stomach to stone, to make it through. I was ready, but Eric wasn't. He hesitated, shaking his head. "I'm not going in there," he said. He wasn't new to exploring, but tight spaces weren't his thing. I tried to convince him, but it was no use. Finally, we compromised. He'd wait in the main chamber while I explored for no more than an hour. If I didn't return by then, he'd call for help. With a nod, I squeezed into the tunnel. The walls pressed in on me, rough and cold against my arms and knees. The air was stale, and every movement seemed to echo. Crawling forward, I debated on turning back. The passage was long, the space tight, and there was no room to turn around. But something urged me to keep going. Curiosity, excitement, or maybe just stubbornness. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened up. I gasped as I crawled out into a massive cavern. My flashlight illuminated a world that felt untouched by time. Towering stalactites hung like chandeliers, and stalagmites rose like jagged teeth from the floor. A wide stream bisected the cavern, its water crystal clear, and in the distance I heard the low roar of a waterfall. Then I saw them. The rocks. Embedded in the cavern walls were clusters of stones that glowed a faint, otherworldly blue. At first, I thought it was just some trick of the light, but when I switched off my flashlights, the stones continued to glow. It was mesmerizing, alien, unlike anything I'd ever seen. I glanced at my watch. 40 minutes had passed. I needed to head back, but I couldn't resist the urge to take a closer look. Maybe even take one of the stones with me. I approached the wall, running my fingers over the smooth, cool surface. The rocks were embedded deep, but I was determined. Pulling out my knife, I tried to pry one loose. The metal scraped against the stone, the sound sharp and jarring in the silence. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling sound. I froze, heart pounding. The noise came again, louder this time, echoing through the cavern. It wasn't the waterfall. It was something else, something closer. Slowly, I turned, shining my flashlight into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing, just shadows playing on the rocks. Then my beam landed on it. Coiled around a massive stalagmite was a snake, but not like any snake I'd ever seen. Its body was impossibly large, at least 40 or 50 feet long, and its scales were black with streaks of glowing blue that matched the rocks. Its head was wedge-shaped, and its eyes fixed on me with an intensity that turned my blood to ice. I didn't wait. The moment it uncoiled and lunged in my direction, I ran, straight for the tunnel. Throwing myself into the narrow passage, I crawled as fast as I could, scraping my hands and knees on the rough stone. Behind me, I could hear it, a heavy, slithering sound that echoed closer and closer. My mind screamed that the tunnel was too small for it to follow, but I didn't dare slow down. Every second felt like an eternity. The walls of the tunnel seemed to close in on me, my breathing ragged and panicked. Then finally, I saw it. Light. Eric's flashlight was at the other end of the tunnel. Summoning every ounce of strength, I pushed myself forward, bursting out of the tunnel and into the main chamber. Gasping for air, I spun around, flashlight in hand, but the tunnel was empty. The snake hadn't followed. Eric stared at me wide-eyed as I tried to explain what I'd seen, but it was hard to explain a giant snake and glowing rocks. I could tell he was skeptical. I knew what I saw, but even now, it feels like a fever dream. I've never gone back, and I've never told anyone else where that cave is. Some places aren't meant to be explored, and some mysteries are best left undiscovered. A few months ago, I was called into a situation that still haunts me. I've spent most of my life exploring caves, mapping unknown systems, and even assisting in search and rescue missions. When I got a call that a hiker had gone missing near the Jewel Cave system, I didn't think twice. The area they were lost in was one I knew well, an uncharted, off-limits section I had spent countless hours mapping. I called it the Abyss. The name wasn't an exaggeration. This section was treacherous, with winding tunnels, unstable passages, and a sheer 100-foot drop-off into a pit so dark and vast, it seemed to swallow light. When I arrived, the police filled me in. A 26-year-old woman named Claire had been separated from her group. She was last seen near a blocked-off passage. I couldn't shake the thought that if she'd fallen into that pit, her chances of survival were slim. Time was critical. I grabbed my gear and headed into the cave system, navigating with the ease of familiarity. Even after all these years, I could have moved through these tunnels blindfolded. After about 30 minutes, I reached the split where Claire had gone missing. One path led deeper into the map system, while the other was blocked off, dangerous and unmapped. If she'd gone anywhere, it was through the latter. Pushing past the barriers, I scanned for any signs of Claire. It didn't take long to find a climbing glove lying on the ground. It was small, probably hers. I called out, my voice echoing endlessly through the tunnels, but there was no response. I moved further in, the air growing colder and stiller. Eventually, I reached another fork. The left path led to the pit, the abyss. The right, I knew, sloped downward into partially submerged tunnels, an area so dangerous it had been left unmapped. I decided to check the pit first. If Claire was down there, I needed to confirm it before risking the submerged tunnels. When I reached the drop-off, I peered over the edge into the black void. I pulled out a couple of glow sticks, cracking them and tossing them over. They landed with faint greenish light that barely illuminated the bottom. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw movement. Something shifted in the shadows. My heart raced. I called out, and to my shock, I heard a faint reply. A woman's voice. Claire. She was alive. I yelled down, telling her to stay still. My radio wasn't getting a signal this deep in, so I had no way to call for backup. There was no time to waste. Securing my ropes, I set up 2 rappel lines, one for me and one for Claire, and began my descent. The drop was harrowing. The pit seemed to swallow sound, leaving me alone with the scrape of rope against rock and the pounding of my heart. Finally, I reached the bottom. I scanned the dimly lit space with my flashlight. Leaning against the wall was a woman, Claire. I rushed to her, asking her if she was injured. She was remarkably unscathed. No broken bones, no cuts, nothing to indicate she'd fallen such a distance. Her face, however, was pale with terror. I asked her how she got down here. The terror on her face became more apparent by the moment. She started to scream, clawing her way up the walls of the pit. It took several minutes to calm her down enough to speak. Her story chilled me to my core. She explained how she'd lingered at the split, curious about the blocked-off path. As she stood there, something hit her, hard. She blacked out and woke up at the bottom of the pit. Scanning her surroundings with her flashlight, she initially thought she was alone. Then she heard something, a scraping noise. She pointed to a large rock near the wall and said it moved, revealing a hidden tunnel. From that tunnel emerged something not human. She described it as 10 feet tall, muscular, and humanoid, but with glowing green eyes and 2 massive protruding teeth. It didn't speak, but it did drag her into a makeshift camp, a fire and a hut in a larger chamber. The floor was littered with bones, some unmistakably human. At one point, the creature went to its hut, leaving Claire alone. She took the opportunity to escape, running blindly until she ended up back at the pit. She said she didn't remember how she got there, just that she passed out from fear. I wanted to dismiss her story as hysteria or hallucination, shock and dehydration playing tricks on her mind. But how did she end up in the pit, without a scratch? There was no time to question it. We needed to get out. I secured Claire to the second rappel line, and we began the climb. She was calmer now, though her hands still trembled as they gripped the rope. We were nearing the top when I heard it, a sound from the pit below. It was a deep, resonant thud, like a boulder crashing against rock. I glanced down. The bottom of the pit was glowing, an eerie orange light, just like what Claire had described. Then I saw it. A massive figure emerged from the tunnel, silhouetted against the glow. It stood still for a moment, and then it looked up. Even from that distance, I could see its eyes, 2 green orbs cutting through the darkness. Claire began to sob, whispering its back. I yelled for her to keep climbing. We reached the top, and I scrambled to pull her over the edge. Just as I did, a deafening roar echoed from below, a sound so unnatural it froze me in place. Leaving my gear behind, I grabbed Claire and ran. We didn't stop until we were outside. The police rushed to Claire, but as they loaded her into an ambulance, she glanced back at me. Her eyes were full of gratitude and fear. A few days later, we met up to discuss what we saw. We agreed to keep quiet. No one would believe us, and we didn't want anyone venturing into that cursed section of the cave. But sometimes late at night, I wonder if we made the right choice. What if it takes someone else? Could I face that thing again if I had to? I pray I never find out. The cenotes were supposed to be the highlight of my trip to Tulum. I'd been looking forward to it for months, imagining the pictures I'd take, the crystalline water, the lush jungle. It felt like the perfect escape from the stress of school, and as a photographer, I couldn't wait to capture the beauty of all of it. But now, sitting in my dim apartment, staring at my cracked camera, I can't think about the trip without shivering. Something happened there. Something I can't explain. That day started out as one of those days you couldn't dream up any better. Ella, Ashley, and I devoured a resort breakfast that tasted as incredible as it looked. Pancakes, fresh fruit, and juices so sweet they might as well have been desserts. Afterwards, we met up with a group of about 20 people to head to a privately owned cenote. I'd seen photos of it online, hidden away in the jungle, a natural wonder preserved in perfect isolation. The bus ride was a blur of excitement. Ashley was scrolling through Instagram, showing us influencers who had been there, while Ella quizzed the tour guide about the area. The air buzzed with anticipation. When we arrived, I felt like I'd stepped into another world. The jungle seemed to breathe around us, vibrant and alive. The cenote itself was everything I'd imagined and more. The water was so clear that you could see straight to the bottom, and the sunlight filtered through the trees in golden beams. I snapped photos non-stop on the way down the trail, trying to capture the way the leaves danced in the breeze. As the group gathered near the water, our guide Carlos began to talk about the history of the cenotes. He explained how they were sacred to the Maya, believed to be gateways to the underworld. Xibalba, the land of the dead. They perform rituals here, even sacrifices, he told us. It was hard to imagine something so dark in a place so beautiful. That's when I saw it, a cave entrance, roped off and tucked into the side of the cenote. Carlos must have noticed me staring at it. His voice shifted slightly, from casual to serious. One of the rules for visiting this property is that no one goes into the caves, he said. Someone asked him why not. Carlos hesitated, then smiled, like he was trying to brush off the question. The official reason is safety. It is easy to get lost or injured down there. But the truth, he lowered his voice, the family who owns this land is very superstitious. They believe this cave leads directly to Xibalba. They say if you go too deep, you might not come back. Some people laughed nervously, but I almost couldn't stop staring at the dark opening. It was almost magnetic. Ashley leaned over to me, catching my gaze. "Don't even think about it," she whispered. I smirked, brushing her off. I wasn't. Obviously, I lied. The next few hours were incredible. We swam in the cenote, laughing and diving into the cool water. I took pictures of Ashley and Ella floating in the sunlit pool, the jungle creating a perfect frame around them. But no matter how much fun we had, my eyes kept drifting back to the cave. It was like it was calling me, pulling me in. During lunch, Carlos mentioned a hiking trail that led to a hill with a panoramic view of the jungle. Most of the group wanted to go, including Ashley and Ella. I saw my chance. I told Ella and Ashley that I was going to stay, that I'd eaten too much food. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I was actually skipping a photo op. I shrugged and told them I'd got plenty of pictures already. Once I watched the group disappear around the corner, I grabbed my camera and walked casually towards the cave. The older couple sitting nearby didn't even glance up from their sandwiches, and the kid glued to his video game didn't notice me at all. The rope was easy enough to duck under. As soon as I stepped inside, the temperature dropped. The floor sloped downward, the ground rough beneath my bare feet. I turned on my phone flashlight, the beam cutting through the growing darkness. The cave was enormous, pools of water shimmering faintly in the pale light, their surfaces smooth and glassy. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, their tips glittering. It was hauntingly beautiful, like something out of a dream. I raised my camera and started shooting. The sound of the shutter echoed faintly, almost as a whisper. Then I felt it, a cold breeze, unnatural and sharp. It made me freeze. My flashlight wavered as I turned, scanning the cavern, and that's when I heard it. A voice, faint, indecipherable, but undeniably human. I called out, my voice trembling. I asked if anyone was there. No answer. I stepped towards the sound, my camera ready. That's when I saw him. He was sitting on a rock by one of the pools, dressed in what looked like traditional Mayan clothing. His frame was so thin, it looked like his bones might tear through his skin. He stared into the water, unmoving. I lifted my camera, my instincts kicking in. The lens clicked, the flash momentarily lighting up the cavern, and then he turned. His face was skeletal, empty eye sockets, a jaw hanging open as if an eternal scream. My breath caught in my throat as he let out an inhuman wail, the sound reverberating through the cave. He stood and began to move towards me, impossibly fast. I ran. The uneven ground made every step treacherous, but I didn't dare stop. His footsteps echoed behind me, closer and closer. I could hear his groaning, feel the chill of his presence at my back. I reached the steps and scrambled up, my legs burning. As I neared the entrance, I dared to glance back. He was at the bottom of the steps, staring up at me. His hollow eyes seemed to pierce straight through me. Then, in an instant, he was gone, vanished into the shadows. I burst out of the cave, tripping over the rope and tumbling headfirst into the cenote. The water shocked me back to my senses, cold and biting. I surfaced gasping, clutching my camera to my chest. When Ashley and Ella returned, I told them everything. They laughed, shaking their heads, not believing a word I said. But when I got home, I had the camera repaired. I couldn't stop thinking about the photo I'd taken. When I finally saw it, my fear came flooding back, as if I were back in the cave again. The man wasn't sitting in the photo, though. He was standing directly in front of the lens, his skull-like face filling the frame. And that's when I realized the truth. Xibalba isn't a myth, and I had stepped into its domain, and I had met its gatekeeper.